America's debt bomb is ticking louder than ever. The national debt just cracked $39 trillion. Interest payments alone have blown past $1 trillion a year. That's more money going out the door in interest than the entire annual budget for Medicare or national defense in recent years. Rates on treasuries have doubled since 2021, and right now nearly one-third of all publicly held government debt is maturing and has to be rolled over at these punishing new rates. This isn't some abstract Washington problem. It's the reason your tax dollars are getting vacuumed up faster, why future Social Security and Medicare look shakier, and why the government keeps borrowing more just to pay the interest on what it already owes. And this is exactly why the brand new Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh matters. He was just confirmed, and in his very first big statements, he promised a full regime change at the Fed. He's throwing out the old playbook on how we measure inflation, and that one decision could either ease this debt nightmare or keep your borrowing costs painfully high for years. Here's what Warsh actually said at his confirmation hearing. For decades, the Fed's favorite inflation gauge has been core PCE. That measure deliberately kicks out food and energy prices because they bounce around too much. Basically a quick and dirty way to guess at the real trend. Warsh called that approach outdated. He said we don't need rough guesses anymore. Instead, he wants the Fed to rely on trimmed averages. These measures automatically throw out the wildest price swings on both the high side and the low side, the extreme outliers, so policymakers can see the clean, persistent underlying inflation that's actually being driven by money, supply, and economic capacity, not the temporary chaos caused by a bad harvest, a shipping crisis, or a geopolitical shock. Let me make this crystal clear with examples you feel every single month. When beef prices jump because of a drought in cattle country, or when your utility bill spikes after a hurricane knocks out power plants, those are real price increases that hit your grocery cart and your bank account. But they are not the same thing as monetary inflation. True inflation is when the Fed has created too much money and every dollar in your pocket buys less across the entire economy. Warsh wants the central bank to stop overreacting to those one-off shocks and start targeting the broad, sticky price pressures that actually matter for long-term policy. I'm going to be straight with you. This is one of the most sensible shifts I've heard from any Fed official in years. The old core PCE method forced the Fed into knee-jerk rate decisions that sometimes made the debt situation even worse. Remember 21-23? Volatile energy and food prices made headline inflation look terrifying, so the Fed slammed rates higher and faster than maybe it needed to. Businesses and families paid the price with higher borrowing costs, while the government's own interest tab exploded. Trimmed averages cut through that noise. They give a clearer signal, which should mean steadier policy instead of constant whiplash. That steadiness matters enormously for the debt crisis. With so much Treasury debt rolling over this year, predictable interest rates could actually lower the government's long-term borrowing costs. Lower borrowing costs mean less pressure to print money or raise taxes later. In my opinion, this regime change could be the single biggest tool we have right now to stop the debt spiral from getting completely out of control. But, and this is the part nobody in Washington wants to say out loud, there are real trade-offs, and you're going to feel them. First, trimmed averages can make the Fed look behind the curve on the inflation you actually experience. If housing costs, auto insurance, or medical prices keep climbing because of supply shortages or regulations, those extreme moves get trimmed out. The Fed might keep rates higher for longer even, while your monthly expenses are still painful. That directly hits anyone with a mortgage, a car loan, or credit card debt. Second, the stock market and housing market love certainty, but hate prolonged high rates. A more pure inflation signal could keep the cost of capital elevated, which is great for savers earning decent yields on money market funds, but brutal for young families trying to buy their first home or for small businesses trying to expand. Third, if the Fed becomes too laser-focused on underlying trends and ignores real-world pain, we risk a policy mistake in the other direction at either letting inflation reaccelerate quietly or slowing the economy too much and triggering higher unemployment. So yes, Warsh's approach is smarter than the old blunt instrument, but it's not magic. It's a recalibration with consequences. Here's exactly how this new regime is likely to hit your wallet in the next 12 to 24 months. Mortgage and refinance rates may stay higher for longer than Wall Street is hoping, even if headline inflation cools. Savings accounts, CDs, and Treasuries could keep paying attractive real yields. Good news if you have cash on the sidelines. The stock market may reward companies with strong pricing power and punish highly leveraged sectors. Retirement accounts invested in bonds could finally breathe easier if rate volatility drops. Bottom line, this isn't just another Fed speech. It's a fundamental rewrite of the rules that will shape interest rates, asset prices, and government borrowing costs for the rest of the decade. So what should you actually do about it? Here are 4 practical moves you can make right now. Regardless of how the markets react in the short term, lock in fixed-rate debt where it still makes sense. If you have adjustable-rate loans or credit cards, prioritize paying them down or refinancing into fixed rates before any further policy surprises. Build a proper cash buffer earning real yields. High-yield savings, short-term treasuries, or money market funds are finally paying something meaningful again. Use Warsh's steadier policy environment to let your emergency fund actually grow instead of being eaten by inflation. Diversify beyond just stocks. Add some inflation hedge exposure, tips, commodities, or even a small allocation to gold or Bitcoin. Because even with better inflation measurement, the debt load still creates long-term pressure on the dollar. Stay informed and flexible. Set calendar reminders for the next few FOMC meetings. Warsh's regime change will show up first in how the Fed talks about data. The investor who understands the new rulebook will always be one step ahead of the crowd chasing yesterday's headlines. Look, the debt problem isn't going away, but for the first time in a while, we have a Fed chair openly admitting the old measurement tools were broken and proposing something more precise. Whether it actually tames the debt monster or just manages the symptoms is still up to Congress and the White House. But Warsh just gave policymakers a fighting chance. If you want to know exactly how this plays out for your specific situation, housing, retirement, small business, or investments, drop your biggest concern in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'll make follow-up videos on the topics that matter most to you. Smash the like button if you think the Fed finally needs to get serious about measuring inflation the right way. Subscribe so you don't miss the next regime change update, and I'll see you in the next video where we break down exactly what Warsh's first policy meeting could mean for your paycheck. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp out there.